A flawed study leads to calls for greater gun control. I'm Brian Lilley with the Rebel.media. Canada's doctors, or at least some of them with the official organizations, they want to get political, and they're calling not only for greater gun control, but for your child's doctor to pry into your personal life and lecture you if you are a law-abiding gun owner. There's a new paper published by the Canadian Medical Association Journal that reminds me of a saying a teacher introduced me to after I submitted a rather poorly written essay in the later stages of high school. I tried to cover up the fact it was poorly written, and the teacher said, if you can't baffle them with brains, baffle them with bullshit. And that's what this paper reminds me of. The paper is actually titled Risk of Firearm Injuries Among Children and Youth of Immigrant Families. Now, there's some interesting facts and observations about gun injuries. Who gets them? Immigrant compared to refugee, immigrant compared to non-immigrant. But as you read the report, and especially the accompanying media coverage, you quickly realize that this study is really about pushing for more gun control. I mean, all you have to do is look at the headlines. CBC, 1 injury a day from firearms in Ontario, pediatricians find. Toronto Sun, firearms injure child or youth almost daily in Ontario. Global News, every day a child or youth is injured by gun violence in Ontario, study warns. The Globe and Mail, 1 youth shot almost every day in Ontario, study finds. Now, having heard those headlines, having heard words like pediatrician, child, youth, some of the stories using images of a small child reaching for a handgun, well, with all of that in mind, what are you thinking of? You're likely thinking that little kids are getting their hands on daddy's guns and harming themselves, or maybe others. In some cases, I'm sure that's what is happening. The study doesn't tell us, but let me show you what the study does tell us. The study shows something about the age group. It goes up to age 24, or as I like to call people that age, adults. If you're over 18, you're an adult. I don't know a single 24-year-old going to see a pediatrician, for goodness sakes. Now, I asked the people behind the study, an organization called the Institute for Clinical Evaluative Sciences, for a better age breakdown. They couldn't or wouldn't give it to me. The PR person I spoke to said they didn't break it down other than the way it's reported in the study. Well, Table 2 in the study shows how they report the unintentional and the assault-related gunshot injuries. They break it down to under 15 and over 15, between 15 and 24. So over a 4-year period between 2008 and 2012, there are 292 non-immigrants and 20 immigrants under the age of 15 that suffered gun injuries in Ontario. That averages out at about 78 a year. While still too many, when you consider the population of Ontario's 13.5 million in that time frame, 140,000 live births each year, the number is actually pretty small. Then there's the 15 to 24-year-old age group, and I find this cohort troubling. Don't come to me and talk about children and youth when people 18 and up are adults. The biggest chunk of this group are adults, and they also represent the biggest chunk of those injured. 877 non-immigrants in the 15 to 24-year-old age group sustained unintentional gun injuries in Canada over the 4 years from 2008 to 2012. 140 immigrants did the same. While this is being sold as kids playing with guns, the facts tell a different story, something the paper's authors give away with this line. The predictors of firearm injury in our study were comparable to those in other studies that reported males, low socioeconomic status, and late adolescence and young adulthood were associated with firearm injury. Late adolescence or young adulthood, so not children. By the way, that works out to 254 injuries per year. Still too many, but not earth-shattering. Dr. Catherine Austin of the Canadian Paediatric Society told Canadian Press in their story on this issue that the numbers are still way too high. That's a lot, said Austin. Can you imagine any other consumer product that caused 1 injury a day over a period of 5 years? Well, I can. It's called the car, or the family van, and it's responsible for more deaths and injuries than guns ever will be. It's right there on the Paediatric Society's own website. Number 1 cause of injury, motor vehicle accident. Stats Canada also has some shocking numbers on injuries from motor vehicles. Tens of thousands each year, not just nearly 1 a day. In 2010, just shy of 51,000 people aged 24 and under were injured in a motor vehicle crash. That works out to 140 injuries per day. Where's the fear-mongering from doctors over that? And if you don't think they're fear-mongering, consider this sentence put out there like it's an actual fact. Household gun ownership increases the risk of unintentional firearm injuries. Their source for that? A U.S. study. The Americans have a much different gun culture than we do in Canada. They have much different gun laws. These authors, without citing what our gun laws actually are, want tougher laws. It's all for the children, of course. The authors begin their call for greater gun control by saying a number of interventions have been associated with reductions in firearm injury rates, including firearm legislation, restricting gun ownership, registration and access, and recommendations around safe firearm storage. We already have legislation restricting gun ownership. We have a licensing system, but thankfully no wasteful registry anymore. And as for storage, it's vastly different than in the United States. We have strict storage laws. Here's how you have to store your non-restricted firearms in Canada. According to the Firearms Act, Section 5, Subsection 1, an individual may store a non-restricted firearm only if A, it is unloaded, B, it is rendered inoperable by means of a secure locking device, rendered inoperable by the removal of the bolt or bolt carrier, or stored in a container, receptacle, or room that is kept securely locked and that is constructed so that it cannot readily be broken open or into, and it is not readily accessible to the ammunition unless the ammunition is stored together with or separately from the firearm in a container or receptacle that is kept securely locked and that is constructed so that it cannot readily be broken open or into. Those are the storage laws in Canada, and it's because of these laws and also because of the safety-first nature of the gun culture in this country that we have relatively low rates of firearms injuries, something the authors actually note in passing while still calling for tougher laws. It's right in the study, not that you'll find it in the media reports. They say Canada has relatively few firearms injuries, although many countries, predominantly in South and East Asia, have even lower rates than observed in the current study. Look, we all want fewer deaths from guns, just like we want fewer deaths from disease and from car accidents. But scaring people and turning doctors into people that pry into our personal lives while treating our children, that's not the way to go. I don't think it was by coincidence that the Canadian Paediatric Society came out with their new guidelines for their members on this exact issue at the exact same time that this study, this Flawed study, came out. Among the guidelines from the Society, quote, every family, rural and urban, should be screened for gun ownership. Physicians must make parents aware of the risk of firearms availability and counsel that firearms not be kept in environments where children and adolescents live and play. Well, quite frankly, doctors, it's none of your damn business what is or is not in my house. Keep your thoughts on anything that is not medical to yourself. If a teen's having suicidal thoughts, maybe there's a valid reason for a discussion like this. But this guideline isn't about that. It's about being nosy and bossy. One final point on the guidelines, the Paediatric Society proves they don't have a clue about guns when they write as a recommendation for government action the following tighter restrictions on semi-automatic military-style firearms. Their use increases the lethality of mass shooting incidents. Well, they obviously don't know what is legal, what is available in Canada, and it shows that their advice on guns is about as valid as my medical advice. If we want to make kids safer around guns, the answer isn't fear, it's education. I started shooting at 14 and was made painfully aware at that time what could happen to me and others if I goofed around or was simply careless. Teach kids how to use firearms properly, store them properly when adults aren't around. That's how you fix the problem of injuries, not with what the doctors are suggesting now. If you like the Rebel video you just watched and want to support the kind of journalism that you've just seen, well, make sure you click subscribe to our YouTube channel or head on over to therebel.media and become a member.